hair for something like that, though, Dakota. Like, I mean, I'd be like flossing my teeth and, you know, checking myself out in the mirror and all that kind of thing. But I mean, to get to that place and to be so...
In the dim amber light of a quiet cafe tucked into the cobbled streets of Edinburgh's old town, Sam Heughan sat alone by the window, absently twisting a silver ring between his fingers, its faint glint catching the reflection of the rain-streaked glass. He looked like any other traveler lost in thought, but there was something about the stillness of his posture, an emotional gravity that seemed to pull the world around him into silence. When the door opened and a woman stepped in, the air changed. Dark brown hair cascaded from beneath a trench coat collar, and oversized sunglasses hid most of her face, but when she removed them, there was no mistaking her. Caitriona Balfe, the Irish actress who had for over a decade played Claire Fraser beside him in Outlander. They didn't greet each other with a hug or a kiss. They didn't need to. Their eyes met, and in that shared silence, something more profound than words passed between them. A look heavy with history, memory, and restraint. "It's been 10 years, Sam said softly, almost smiling, the weight of the number sitting somewhere between pride and sorrow. "And no one knows." Caitriona's lips curved faintly. "Almost no one." Their story, if it could even be called that, began in 2013 when two relatively unknown names were paired in a casting room in London. Sam, the ambitious stage actor with a deep Scottish brogue, and Caitriona, the poised former model newly turning to acting, were strangers until that moment. Yet, as soon as they read their first lines together, the chemistry was undeniable. The director had watched in stunned silence before uttering the words that would change both their lives. No need to try again. They belonged together. What no one could have predicted was that their on-screen pairing as Jamie and Claire Fraser would become one of the most beloved romances in television history, and that somewhere between scripted passion and genuine connection, the line between fiction and reality would begin to blur. At first, it was harmless. Long rehearsals, shared laughter, lingering glances during table reads. Then came the scenes that demanded vulnerability, the touches that lingered after cut, the tears that weren't entirely in character. In one interview years later, Sam admitted, "There was a scene where Claire had to hold Jamie's hand while he was dying. When they called cut, she didn't let go. And I didn't want to let go either. But Hollywood, with its invisible rules and silent politics, rarely allows something so raw to exist without consequence. Behind the glamour, there are unspoken laws. Don't date your co-star, especially not in a long-running series built on romantic fantasy. If love blossoms, it fuels the magic. But if it breaks, it can destroy the illusion, and with it, the show itself." Both Sam and Caitriona understood this. The bond between Jamie and Claire had become sacred to millions of fans across the world. Their chemistry was the beating heart of Outlander. "We knew that if our personal feelings crossed into our work, it could ruin everything," Caitriona once wrote in a private diary later quoted in a behind-the-scenes photo exhibition. "Not just our friendship, but the story people believed in. So we made the hardest choice to keep it under wraps. Not to stop feeling, but to stop revealing." In that choice, their love, or whatever name it deserved, moved into the shadows, where it could exist only in secret gestures, hidden messages, and quiet promises between takes. Rumors soon began to swirl, fueled by fans who noticed the subtle tenderness between them, the kind that couldn't be faked. In 2017, a blurry photograph emerged from Prague, where Season 3 was being filmed, showing two familiar silhouettes walking hand in hand through a narrow street at midnight. Their faces were turned away, but their body language, gentle, familiar, unguarded, spoke volumes. Neither ever confirmed nor denied it. During a fan livestream that same year, Sam let something slip when asked about the challenges of filming Season 3, in which Jamie and Claire are separated for most of the story. He smiled wistfully and said, "That was the hardest season. I missed her more than I expected to." The comment was brushed off as professional camaraderie, but those who had followed their journey recognized the longing beneath his tone. A studio assistant later revealed a touching detail from the set of the emotional childbirth scene that season. After the director called cut, Caitriona couldn't stop crying. She wasn't exhausted or overwhelmed by the technical demands. it was something else. Sam had whispered something in her ear during the embrace, words no one else could hear. When asked later what he'd said, Caitriona simply replied, "He said something I'd been waiting to hear, and I promised." The assistant didn't press further, but in her notes, she wrote one word, unspoken, that seemed to define them both. Their connection lived in the spaces between words. As Outlander became an international phenomenon, the pair found themselves under the relentless glare of fame. Every interview, every red carpet, every Instagram post was dissected by fans searching for signs of the romance they believed was real. The hashtag #SamCait exploded online, transforming their private dynamic into a global obsession. Journalists asked probing questions, tabloids ran speculative headlines, and even their co-stars were caught in the middle of the myth. When Caitriona surprised the world by marrying music producer Anthony McGill in 2019, fans were heartbroken and whispers grew louder. Had she chosen duty over love? Was Sam jealous? The media demanded clarity, but Sam remained gracious, smiling through interviews and offering only cryptic answers. "Caitriona deserves all the happiness in the world," he said during a 2020 panel. "She's one of my favorite people. Always will be." The pause before "always" said more than the words themselves. Those close to the set often described a kind of quiet sadness that lingered between them after her marriage. Professional respect tinged with wistfulness. Yet their performances never faltered. If anything, the maturity and ache that began to define Jamie and Claire's later relationship on screen felt more authentic, more deeply lived. It was as though they were channeling the love they could no longer publicly claim into the art that first bound them together. Maybe that's why their chemistry never faded, a crew member once reflected. Because it was never acting, it was just redirected. Even their interviews together carried a delicate dance of affection restrained by professionalism. Glances that lingered a fraction too long, laughter that hinted at private memories, silence that spoke like poetry. Years later, in that Edinburgh cafe, the air between them was filled with the weight of everything unsaid. A decade of shared glances, sacrifices, and near confessions hung invisibly over the steaming cups of coffee on the table. "Do you ever think it could have been different?" Sam asked quietly, tracing the rim of his cup. Caitriona hesitated, then answered softly, "If it had been different, maybe Outlander wouldn't have been what it became. Maybe we wouldn't be who we are now." It wasn't an excuse, it was acceptance. They had given the world their love story, but in doing so, they had surrendered their own. For 10 years, what existed between them defied definition. Part friendship, part love, part shared artistic soul. They learned to communicate in the spaces between cameras, in the brush of a hand or the flicker of an eye that said "I remember." They built careers, won awards, and carried on as professionals. But beneath the public smiles was a connection too deep to label, too sacred to display. In the end, they chose silence not out of shame, but as a form of protection for each other, for the work that had immortalized them, and perhaps for the fragile part of themselves that still belonged to that first audition room in 2013, when everything was still possible. And so, when Sam finally looked up from his coffee that day in Edinburgh, meeting Caitriona's steady gaze, there was no need for explanation, no yearning for closure. The love they had lived, both real and imagined, had already written itself into history.
Oh, that's good. I want to know it.
Yes, we all want to know. I dare you. I dare you.
I can't.
For more than a decade, Sam Heughan and Caitriona Balfe have lived within a delicate silence that the world has constantly tried to break. A silence woven from glances, gestures, and unspoken promises rather than public declarations. It began as an unanticipated connection on the set of Outlander in 2013, when two relatively unknown actors, he, a Scottish stage performer with quiet intensity, and she, an Irish model-turned-actress, found themselves embodying Jamie and Claire Fraser, characters bound by time, loyalty, and impossible love. What started as on-screen chemistry soon evolved into something that blurred the line between fiction and reality. Crew members would later whisper about the quiet moments between takes, the way their hands lingered a little too long, or how they seemed to converse without words. Yet, from the beginning, both Sam and Caitriona knew that any public acknowledgement of their feelings could threaten not only their professional futures, but the fragile magic of the show that made them stars. The entertainment industry thrives on speculation, but it punishes the truth when it no longer fits the narrative. And so they made a choice: to love, to protect, and to remain unseen. Sam once said during an interview, "Cat is one of the most important people in my life, and sometimes the most important things are not for the public." It was both a confession and a shield, a way to say everything without saying anything. When Caitriona later married a man outside the spotlight, many believed the story had ended, but those close to them hinted otherwise. What existed between them was not romance in the traditional sense. It was loyalty, devotion, a secret companionship nurtured through understanding rather than ownership. They grew closer after her marriage, not further apart, united by the very silence that once separated them. Insiders spoke of a private language between them, a subtle code that revealed itself only through fleeting glances, faint smiles, or the gentle touch of a hand on the red carpet. At the 2017 Emmy Awards, when Caitriona received her nomination, Sam's reaction said more than any headline could. He stood, clapping with an intensity that carried admiration, pride, and a depth of emotion few dared to interpret. "They don't need to speak," one friend said. "They just look at each other and understand." Whether on freezing Scottish hillsides or crowded press tours, they carried an invisible current between them, protecting each other without ever naming what they were protecting. In 2018, after filming the 4th season, they shared a quiet evening in a small Scottish cafe, away from the cameras and fans. Caitriona later hinted at this encounter, describing how they sat for a long time without words until Sam finally said, "We can't let what they're guessing become the story itself. We have to protect it, not for them, but for us." That conversation sealed their silent pact, a promise of preservation over publicity, what Caitriona later called the secret of two hearts. Over the years, their subtle loyalty became a rare form of love in an industry built on exposure. When Caitriona was criticized online or subject to unfounded rumors, Sam was always the first to respond, never dramatically, but with quiet steadiness. And when Sam faced scrutiny over his projects or personal choices, Caitriona would post poetic lines about courage or resilience, messages that fans took as abstract, but those who knew understood. A close friend once said, "They're two halves of the same soul. When one struggles, the other feels it." The price of such devotion, however, is solitude. Sam admitted in one rare interview that he turned down offers and opportunities abroad to remain near her, saying that proximity sometimes meant more than recognition. Caitriona confessed in another moment of honesty that she often cried alone, unable to share her truest emotions with anyone, not even with those who thought they knew her best. Their love, if it can be called that, lived in a suspended state, untouched by the definitions that make relationships